So good evening, folks. My name is John Marshall, and I have the great privilege of serving as the principal of Douglas Freeman High School. About a month ago, at the urging of many of our community members and students, we asked our community if our school's nickname or mascot, the Rebels, matched our core values as an organization. And this conversation was not a new one. The events of the last few months in Richmond and around the world, along with our formal request for responses, has renewed that discussion in our community. And we're happy to report that the community has responded. The thousands of responses that we've received include rich experiences from those who walked into our hallways in the 1950s and talking about the smell of fresh paint in our brand new building, to those with young children who just moved into our community and shared their views on the subject. We'll continue to reflect out what we've learned. Of course, you can actually see some of those entries if you click what we've learned on this website. And we're going to continue this process so that you can hear what those around you in the community are saying. I believe it's especially important to hear from those who have a different experience with the term Rebels than your own. In fact, that's just what this evening is about. And it's my job to welcome you to this Freeman Family Forum, a panel discussion on the name Rebels, our mascot and nickname. This decision could have been made behind closed doors without public discussion, but as a Freeman family, we believe in leaning into tough conversations and listening to one another. It wouldn't be responsible to bring all 2,000 Freeman families and 25,000 alumni into one physical space right now. So we're going to have this conversation today electronically, and we're very glad that you've tuned in. We've selected a panel that represents the continuum of views of what we've heard. For those tuning in this evening, I suspect you'll hear your opinion represented at some point in the next hour to hour and a half. Those on this panel were chosen because each holds a view that represents a large swath of the responses we've received. And I have confidence in each one of our members, our panel members, to present their experiences, reflecting back what we're hearing from the community. One note, we purposely did not include any students on this panel this evening to be sure that students didn't bear any brunt of any negative attention that their views might cause. But students are very much a part of this process. They make up a significant portion of our committee, which will advise my team on this decision. And hundreds are making their voices heard through their responses and through their activism. For the students watching, as I mentioned in my message to you via Instagram and email over the last few days, we want to hear from you, and we are absolutely listening. The purpose of this evening. Is not for anyone to win the debate or to score points. Instead, we've asked a thoughtful group to share their experiences with the nickname and mascot Rebels. And my team, along with the Freeman Mascot Committee, who will help advise the decision, will be listening. I hope each of you does the same from a posture of learning and being open to seeing others' perspective. No matter where we stand on the term Rebels, it's my hope that you share my belief that we are a Freeman family, and that part of being a family is being willing to disagree sometimes, but always in keeping in mind what's important. In this case, what's important is effectively serving our students and our community. Thank you to the panelists for providing voices to this discussion. Sincerely, thank you. To our skilled moderators, Jonathan Zur and Charm Bullard from the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, and to all of you for tuning in and viewing this discussion with an open mind. With that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jonathan Zur, President and CEO of the Virginia Center of Inclusive Communities, and Ms. Charm Bullard. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marshall. Charm and I are so grateful to be invited to join some important members of the Freeman High School community to have this conversation this evening. And as Mr. Marshall noted, this is one opportunity among many for the administrators at Freeman High School to gather input regarding the school's mascot. Tonight, Charm and I ask that each of our panelists speaks openly and honestly, does so with respect for one another and all members of the Freeman family, actively listens to the other perspectives that are shared, whether you agree with them or not, and speaks from the I perspective. I'll ask you to share your personal views, but to not definitively speak on behalf of an entire group of people. All alumni think this, all administrators think that, all teachers think this. You're speaking for yourself tonight and reflecting your perspective and your view. Put simply, this is a conversation. It is not a debate. We are not on Jerry Springer. And while you may bring strong feelings and emotions to these issues, Charm and I ask that you constructively share your opinions in a thoughtful and productive way. So we'll ask some questions along the way, some that we have prepared, and many that come from folks who are watching this, who are going to the freemanmascot.info website and submitting their questions there. We'll get through as many questions as we can during our time together this evening, and we'll do our best to make sure that we hear from each of you as many times as possible, trying to make sure there's balance in terms of voices and perspectives. So with all of that background out of the way, I'll turn things over to my colleague Charm to get us started.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure and honor to be here. So to begin, what I'd like to do is introduce each of the panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to share a bit about their relationship with Freeman High School, specifically thinking about what their experience was like at the school. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. So that means we're going to start with Drew Bright.
And Mr. Bright, you are muted. If you can unmute your computer, we'll get the unmuting awkwardness out of the way to start off our conversation tonight.
Is that better?
That is, yes, sir. Thank you.
Oh, yes, sir.
Born and bred in New Jersey, so I was not from Virginia or Richmond. I came down to college, got my first and only professional job beginning in 1972 at Douglas Freeman. Remained there for 42 years, 37 as a teacher and coach, my last 5 as the athletic director. I've been retired since 2016. I continue to help with the athletics and with the Athletic Hall of Fame at Douglas Freeman. I had no knowledge of anybody at Douglas Freeman when I came. I would say my experience there from the very beginning was one of welcome and warmth, even though I was a Northerner coming in. And I felt, especially as a coach, I felt that the student body was very receptive, very encouraging, whether they be a participant or a fan. I felt that Douglas Freeman the student body participated in everything, whether it be an athletic event, whether it be a fundraiser, whether it be for the Christmas mother. We were the Douglas Freeman family. I think Dr. Pruden was the one that coined that phrase. At least I'm familiar with it from that point on. But it certainly was a phrase that put us into perspective as a family. The alumni have been very supportive, and from all the years that we were there. And so I enjoyed my 42 years immensely at Douglas Freeman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bright. Next, let's plan to hear from Fred Facka. Tell us about your relationship with Freeman High School and describe what your experience was like at the school.
Well, thank you, Charm. I'm going to remove my headphones because there's a slight delay. I'm so blessed to be a part of the Freeman family and alumni specifically. My earliest recollection of Freeman was a part of a community that I grew up with a single mother. We lived in the apartments on 3 Chopped Road, about 1.5 miles. They're still there. And every Friday night we heard this commotion up the street, and that being a football game. Apparently, I didn't know at the time. And so the concept was there, and we had older people in the community that went to Freeman. But this idea that, hey, there's something out there exciting and bigger than my world at age 8, 9, or 10. Years later, a friend brought me to a basketball game during the winter, and it was just electrifying, the atmosphere. And so it kind of goes dormant from there, but went to Freeman and was athletically inclined. I was a basketball player, had a wonderful experience at Freeman. The teachers, the administrators, the coaches were just the best people, character-wise, integrity-wise, across the board, really. It really doesn't matter. I was fortunate enough to play with some friends throughout the years that we were successful in basketball. I particularly had individual success as a part of a team, being All-State, Richmond Times Dispatch Player of the Year, and got a full scholarship to college, which saved my mom a lot of money, obviously. But after that, and always kept the Freeman ideal of the standard of excellence wherever I went, athletically, academically. I was National Honor Society too, by the way, at Freeman. Got a master's degree at VCU in the School of Business. My experience there led me to create what I'll talk about in a minute at Freeman, if I could just have another minute. I was instrumental in formulating a sub-alumni group at the School of Business called the Association of Real Estate Alumni. We raised our own endowment funds to the level of $50,000, and we still give 2 scholarships to this day. This was 1995, 4 or 5. Well, actually, no, 1992. And then this thought struck me. We had success down there, and I said that the lights went off. Why not Freeman? And so I got together with a Freeman graduate who was a CPA, and we founded what we believed was the first legitimate 501c3 nonprofit public high school alumni association, not only in the area, but perhaps the state, maybe the region, who knows, maybe the country. And so I'm still involved on executive management decisions. We're small, but we're engaged. And so that's really something that I can talk a little bit later about as well, the engagement of alumni back to the school to create this inclusivity, if you will, and being there that other schools don't have. So we're very unique as alumni in that way. And we all adhere to this ideal as a rebel of the standard of excellence through academics and athletics and the arts. And it's evident in the panel today, I would say. So let me stop there and tell you that, it's just a blessing to be in this community, to establish, concepts and ideals based on inclusivity and performance and competition and excellence. And I'll leave it at that and probably revisit that a number of times tonight.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Now we're going to turn to Kennedy Mackey. How were you connected to Freeman High School, and what was your experience like at the school?
Let me get the unmute. Sure. So good evening, everyone. My name is Kennedy Mackey. I attended Freeman from 2014 to 2018. I am originally zoned for the Varina area, and I applied to come to Freeman for the Leadership Center during my 8th grade year. During my time at Freeman, I was a part of We the People through the Leadership Center. I was a part of Success, which was a mentoring organization that Mr. Marshall, who we heard from earlier, actually created at the school to aid with students who were having a harder time than some of us with academics and social and cultural differences within the school. I was very instrumental in our school student demonstrations in 2018 during the nationwide protests against gun violence in schools. And so that's something that I'll hold dearly as I remember my time at Freeman. After leaving Freeman, I went on to Spelman. I'm there now. I'm a political science major and philosophy minor. I was quick to answer the call when Mr. Marshall called about being here tonight. I will always make sure to be here when it comes to Freeman and when it comes to the inclusivity at Freeman, to make sure that we always have room to grow and that we are taking those opportunities where we have them.
Charm, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Get that mute awkwardness out of the way. Thank you so much, Ms. Mackey. So we're gonna turn next to Ed Pruden. Again, what's your relationship with Freeman High School and what was your experience like?
I think I first of all relate to Freeman as a parent because all three of our children graduated there. Our oldest daughter began attending Freeman in 1987. Our youngest graduated in 2006. And I had the wonderful opportunity to serve as principal from 2000 to 07. And somebody was going to Douglas Freeman from our house for 20 years, from 87 to 07. We've lived in the Freeman community for 3 decades. Neighbors, friends, folks at church, this has been our school. And it's very near and dear to my heart. When I met with the faculty and announced that I was taking another position, I began to weep, and immediately the principal hat came off and the parent hat went on, and all I could muster the ability to say was to thank them, that magnificent faculty, for what they had done for our 3 children.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mr. Pruden. So next up is going to be Jamie Smith. Please tell us your relationship with Freeman High School, and again, describe what your experience was like at the school.
Folks, Jamie Smith. I want to start by acknowledging both Dr. Pruden and Coach Bright. I was a student from 2002 to 2006 while Coach Bright was teaching and Dr. Pruden was the principal there. I graduated in 06 and attended Virginia Tech. So Richmond is my hometown, Virginia very much my home state. Afterwards, went off to DC for a number of years doing some consulting work there. And about 5 or so years ago, came out west to join Google, where I'm currently, I lead a small team that does analytics. In terms of my experience at Freeman, I would say that in general, the Freeman family, I believe, is extremely strong. I personally loved my time at Freeman. I was very active. I was in the part of the football team, basketball team, track team. I was also one of the very few students to do both football as well as the marching band. So I was very, very indoctrinated to all of the possible activities to be involved with at Freeman. One thing that I will note, though, is that I think that there are still some challenges that we have, or at least we had during my time at Freeman, almost having sort of 2 communities within the Freeman family. I think that I was oftentimes wearing different hats depending on the community that I was a part of or participating within. I don't know, maybe Kennedy felt the same thing. The friends that she was making within the Leadership Center may not have been the friends that she had outside of those settings. And that was oftentimes my experience as well. Many folks probably know Cloisters Apartments, Nottingham Green. That was the after school. Those were the folks who were all my friends. But when I looked around me as part of honors AP classes, those folks weren't part of that world oftentimes, which I think is very unfortunate. But for me, what's important is to make sure that we're bringing all perspectives to the table and that we're doing our darndest to make sure that those perspectives are heard and brought together as much as possible. And I think that that's really how we drive inclusion at Freeman, to make sure that we are upholding the values that we hold ourselves to and ensuring that we have a tight-knit Freeman family.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. And certainly last but not least, we're going to hear from Harry Warner. How are you connected to Freeman High School, and what was your experience like at the school?
Sure. Thank you, Charm and Jonathan and John Marshall. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. My direct connections through my children. I'm a native Richmonder, but I moved away before high school. And so my first real, introduction to Freeman was with fraternity brothers in college and other friends, and actually coming down at the time for a football game. And then throughout the years, Freeman always, of course, having mostly a pretty good team. I mean, there are challenges there as well, but always being in the media as far as that goes. I've got 3 children, one who graduated 4 years ago and just graduated from Tech, Jamie. One who just graduated from Freeman last month and will be heading to Longwood. And then I've got a current student there as well too. Won't be hard to figure out who that is. So you guys lay off of them later on. But I think I was asked to be part of this by John, not only because of my connection with my children and my perspective through their viewpoints, but I'm also have been part of the historic fabric for Richmond too. In my career, I was a history major in college. I am in the nonprofit sector, and in fact had been at the what's now the National Civil War Museum. It started out as the Civil War Center 20 years ago, and that was different at the time. It wasn't just Union Confederate. We were bringing in the African American Black story also, and that was a challenge, and I can get into more of that later. And I learned a lot from that as a native Richmonder, but also had been in the military, so I'm a veteran. And I also was at the Virginia War Memorial too. So I think I bring a little bit of a perspective, and through the conversations that I've been involved in for the last 20 years. So that's my connection.
Well, thanks to each of you. It's clear that you care deeply about the school, and your connection is very much appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone who is watching. I want to ask, and we'll go in reverse alphabetical order now. So Harry, you don't have to wait till the end. With the last name Z-U-R, I'm sensitive to those of us who have to wait. So Harry, when you hear Rebels, the name of the Freeman mascot, what comes up for you? What do you think that represents?
I like the word rebel. I think that probably a lot of us, we have as our alter ego, at least being a rebel in some capacity. I think that if you were to take it out of the context of the Civil War, rebel has a pretty good connotations, you know, being an individualist or being a nonconformist perhaps, or maybe a maverick kind of person. I think that the word itself is a good word. It's unfortunately, I think in this context with Freeman, of course, and when it was adopted at the founding of the school in '54, and then having the Rebel Man as the logo back then, and then it's been a word that, of course, is not inclusive for everybody. And that's, of course, why we're having the conversation now. And perhaps there's a way to keep it. We can get into that here later, if changing the narrative in some respect, but perhaps not. And I'm sure that the committee that's been formulated will come up with the right decision.
Thank you. Jamie, how about you? You were a student at Freeman. What did Rebels mean to you then? And what do you think about that as a mascot now? What does it represent?
Yeah. And I think that Harry really hit the nail on the head when he talked about context, right? The word rebel itself, I have similar feelings towards the word in isolation, but the context of the word matters. And I feel as though context setting for words is almost, if not more important than the word itself that's being used. So for instance, if I was watching Star Wars and having a conversation, I might hear rebels and think of like intergalactic peace, right? However, the unfortunate reality that we live in is that when having grown up in Richmond, Virginia, understanding the history behind the word as it relates to DSF, It's almost impossible for me to dissociate Rebel with Confederacy, unfortunately. That said, I won't claim to not have done some Rebel rumbles back in my heyday, but it was always kind of this lingering feeling, if I were to truly reflect on it, what is it that I'm representing when I go out to the football field or I step on the track? And I'd almost have to do this, like, I'm not going to think about it too hard, because there is like such a strong spirit towards the school itself, right? Like we really did have great school spirit while I was there, and don't want to detract from that. But for me, it was always this like disassociation that I would have to actively go through to say, look, when we're talking about this, I'm representing the school. I'm not representing what this word means in the historical context. And I think that that's unfortunate that students would have to do that. But that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. How about Ed, as a principal and as a parent, what did you think about Rebels as a mascot when you were directly at the school, and how about now?
Honestly, I came to Freeman following 28 years in Richmond Public Schools and had been principal of 3 schools in the city, including Thomas Jefferson. So I had the opportunity over the years to listen to Black Richmonders talk about living in the capital of the Confederacy and monuments and names of schools, mascots, and things like that. And I honestly was uncomfortable with it, but I also had a sense that an attempt to start the conversation we're having now 20 years ago would not have been productive. I had a sense that Freeman was a wonderful school. Its logo and its mascot was tied up with its ethos of intensity and pride. It's a strong school. There's great pride. The teachers teach hard. The students work hard. We worked hard. We played hard. It's a serious school with high standards for everybody. And so I tried to use the word family rather than the word rebel whenever I could, just because I was more comfortable with it. Plus, I thought it was good for the culture of the school. We had lost boys from the Sudan. We had 100 kids learning English. We had about, I think now there's about a third of the student body that qualifies for free or reduced lunch. So it has a diverse student body, but still had a culture of high achievement. And I was just afraid at the time that were I to bring that up, we would be talking about that rather than teaching and learning. And so I just spoke about Freeman family. But I felt that our minority students, I just had a sense deep in my heart that they just couldn't be entirely comfortable with that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kennedy, you are our most recent Freeman High School alum. I know that in recent years, there's been some effort to reinterpret what Rebels might represent at the school. As someone who was there, what does the Rebels mascot represent or mean to you?
For me, it's pretty simple. It's just that the word rebel, for me, represents a time and a place and a people who would have in no way been comfortable or an advocate for who I am today and what my reality is today. And so there's nothing that can be done to make me personally comfortable with that. For me, in my opinion, there's no amount of recontextualization, decontextualization that can be done that can change what the word rebel means at a predominantly white school in the west end of Henrico, in Richmond, Virginia, in the capital of the Confederacy. That's just the reality that we happen to live in. And I think that it goes further from that. If I have a shirt, I mean, how do you not have shirts of your high school, right? If I have rebel going across my chest at my now historically Black college or university in Atlanta, they don't know about whatever recontextualization we have tried in Henrico County. And so that's a constant battle of, oh, what is that? Or, those conversations will always be there. And so for me, rebel, I understand that there are other contexts and other definitions for the word, and there are definitely some positives of it. I just think that we have to be honest and truthful about the reality that we live in, and the fact that here today, rebel means rebel, and that's just the final part of it for me.
Thanks, Kennedy. Fred, how about you? What do you think rebels means? What comes to mind for you when you hear that?
Well, I'll go back to the broader, more inclusive, diverse definition of rebel, as opposed to the myopic, and say that we're all rebels. And to echo Harry's sentiment, you know, it's a term of freedom. I can't imagine a world without rebels, in a sense, because we are free to speak up against oppression, a status quo that may be unlawful, in those things. So rebel to me has evolved almost completely. And so the context issue, Jamie, that you brought up is interesting. I wonder if the outside world is the issue as opposed to the halls, if you will, of Douglas Freeman. And I can understand that because it's a lot of pressure outside. So we have this idea, if you'll allow me to do an analogy of ecology or biology, a genus of rebel that has evolved. And guess what? We have over 30,000 alumni. We're not some sleepy corner of Richmond, Virginia. All our alumni are in all 50 states. They're in 15 foreign countries. But the species, if you will, to continue the analogy, we have 30,000 species of rebels. So I would invite my colleagues and administrators to really jettison the past, myopic, intolerant, exclusive definition of rebel, and really wrap our arms around being broad and inclusive in the definition. Here's a small test I'll finish with on this comment is, what do these people have in common? Moses, Martin Luther King, John Glenn, Amelia Earhart, Arthur Ashe, Steve Jobs, Kanye West. They're all rebels. Thank you.
Thank you. And Drew, as a fellow New Jersey transplant to Richmond, I'll turn to you next. Tell me from your perspective as a former educator, coach, athletic director, what does rebels represent to you? And you'll need to unmute your iPad.
Am I?
You were, and we just lost you. Try one more time, please. Nope. There you go. Nope. We lost you again.
How about now?
Yep, we got you. Thank you.
There you go.
What does rebels mean to you, sir?
Well, certainly the 2020 rebel is much different from the 1972 rebel. If you go through the halls of Douglas Freeman today, there is no mascot. I think we don't have a fight song. We are very much the DSF interlocking and script rebels. That is the two things that we have. And certainly the Freeman family is a moniker that everybody in the building echoes. Intensity and pride, we picked that up in the middle 1980s. And many of our athletic teams have picked that up as a moniker. So I think Douglas Freeman has worked hard to rid the obvious symbols that are most objectionable. And we have fought a number of fights. We fought the central office over several issues that we felt very strongly in as a school, and sometimes succeeded, sometimes did not. But I think our 2020 rebel is different. Now, again, everybody's going to have their own idea of things, but we do not currently use or practice any of the things that were very prevalent back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, maybe Jamie, even when you were there. We still had the rebel man and things like that. They don't exist anymore. They're not on any sort of apparel or anything like that. So I think we've worked hard at trying to adjust. I hate to use the word modernize, but to recognize that the rebel needed to be updated and needed to be adjusted to the realities of the time. And Douglas Freeman is certainly, when I came in 1972, we were very homogenous as a student body, and we are certainly not that way today. And yet I would think both Kennedy and Jamie hopefully would think that their experiences, whether they be athletic or academic or social, and they might move from one group to another. I think that's probably true of most people. We all have different groups of people, different groups of friends, depending upon the situation, whether it be athletic or whatever. So I think Douglas Freeman has worked hard to modernize what their idea of a rebel is.
Thank you. Charm, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I sure will. Thanks so much, Jonathan. So the next question we want to pose to the group is, how does the Rebels mascot help Freeman High School? And to start, I'm going to ask Ed to share.
Ed, you'll need
You're
to
on
unmute
mute.
as well.
You're on mute.
I think in the minds of people who have attended Freeman since it was founded in the 50s, the word is associated with the school, with the faculty that they love, with the wonderful experiences they had there, with the wonderful education they got there. And just the association with the entire Freeman experience and the mascot being the rebel, there is a strong feeling of attachment, especially for majority culture students. I don't think our minority culture students through the years have that same attachment to the mascot, as I think Kennedy and Jamie have mentioned. They were aware of it. It was discomforting, if I can use that word, but they still had a great experience anyway. I don't think it helps the school going forward. Something has happened in our country recently. It seems that history and change happens in fits and starts, and rapidly for a while and then slowly for a while. And things are changing in this country. If I could just compare it to something personal, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I am a Washington football fan. I'm going to have to learn to use a different mascot. But nobody ever named an athletic team in disparagement of their mascot. They tried to pick something that showed the values and culture of the organization. And if you ask any Redskin player or fan over the decades what the moniker meant, they would say courage, the will to win, cunning, all the good qualities. And yet, when I listen to Native Americans on television say, I am more than a mascot, it is offensive to me. To me, it rings in my ear like the N-word rings in other ears. I have to respect that. And it didn't mean that to me growing up. I've had to learn and understand that it means that to other people and to respect that. And it's an adjustment. And I think the same thing for our community. Though, for those of us who haven't felt, let me put it the other way, for those of us that have been able to identify with the term rebel, it's kind of difficult to imagine what it's like for those that couldn't, but I think we need to try and respect and be open to the change that is happening around the country now, change that has been building for a long time and is kind of quickly coming to fruition.
Thank you for sharing, Ed. Next, I'm going to have Harry have an opportunity to share. Again, the question was, how does the Rebels mascot help Freeman High School?
When I hear the word mascot, I'm thinking of an image, of course, some graphic design or something like that. More than just the word itself. I go back to again the broader connotation of what a rebel is, and I have seen it again through my children and through their viewpoint. Being able to follow their own path, so to speak, and not being necessarily directed, being supported. And, as Ed had said, and I guess coined the term of a Freeman family, I've seen that as a father, very much so, particularly in a lot of different instances. And the care and the support to help get my children through has been incredible. But they've been able to find their own path and to be able to do their own thing. And so it's not like that they're being constricted into what everybody else expects, to include me as their father.
Thank you. Jamie, do you have anything to share connected to how does the Rebel mascot help Freeman High School?
Yeah, how does it help the high school? I think that there is a general association that many folks feel towards the mascot that brings alumni together in terms of the majority groups oftentimes. And to speak to that feeling of inclusivity for those majority groups, I think that it is sort of a rallying cry across Richmond, understanding that you're part of the Freeman family, part of the Go Rebels chants. But I, at the end of the day, Harry, you mentioned imagery, and it's tough for me to, again, disassociate understanding the historical context, like that Freeman man, or gosh, what's it? I can't think of the rebel man who is a Confederate soldier, wounded Confederate soldier with a bottle of moonshine. Like that's, again, the imagery that I think is drum up by myself and many others, probably in Richmond, when they think of the rebels, even though we do our best to disassociate it with that legacy. I don't know if it's really possible because it's so ingrained in the Richmond culture. So I don't know if I really gave you a positive spin on that, Charm. But.
Thank you for sharing. And again, it's all about you all's experience. And so we're just grateful and thankful we'll have a chance to hear from everyone. So what I'm going to do is call on the next three folks. And then after this, we'll transition. We'll continue with questions, but it'll just be open. You don't necessarily have to go person by person, but we'll finish out the rest of this question with that cadence. Again, the question is, how does the Rebels mascot help Freeman High School? And so I would like to give Kennedy an opportunity to respond if she'd like to.
Yeah, I don't have much for that question. In my personal opinion, I don't think that it does do anything to help the Freeman as a school. I think the community does a lot. The love between students and teachers and that camaraderie, I think that does a lot. But as someone who never once in my 4 years felt any connection to the nickname Rebels, I had a great experience. And so I don't think that it did anything. And I don't think that the lack of that changed my experience in any way.
Thank you for sharing. Want to give an opportunity to Fred to respond to the question, how does the Rebels mascot help Freeman High School?
Oh, thank you, Charm. I thought we were moving on with that, so I appreciate you circling back for me. Well, again, rebels to me means excellence. It's the pursuit of excellence. It's open to everyone. It's not biased in any way. All are welcome to pursue excellence at Douglas Freeman. So I am a broader, more inclusive, tolerant definition, rebel, if you will. I must take exception with a couple things, politely and respectfully. Rebels aren't Redskins, and rebels aren't moonshine racist drunks. So we really have to work honestly about this thing, even to the effect that, as Drew said, we don't have a mascot. What we're talking about is a name, a term, or a logo. Now, for an alternative to a name change, there may be a new mascot. How about a bulldog or a horse named Rebel? These alternatives can be productive and dilute myopic and narrow visions of a term. So I would say that. But let me take 30 seconds more and talk about the future. No one's here defending the past. What we're here to do is defend the future. We need rebels in the broad sense of standing up to power. We're all rebels here today. Kennedy, you're a rebel. Jamie, you're a rebel. Charm, you're a rebel. Let's be honest with each other. Society cannot exist without rebels. Okay, so if we were to disassociate or retire a name, calling it a mascot, which would be a fallacy, we would lose the future freedom fighters that we so desperately emulate. And so, having lost our, and rightly so, retired, our former Confederate mascots, flag, song, rebels becomes actually more important because it's become scarce. And so it means to me the future of being able to speak freely, to talk truth to power. And if left alone, the Freeman family, who has demonstrated evolution on their own, free from government coercion, intervention, I think the future is very bright for the next iteration of rebels. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. The last person, certainly last but not least, is going to be Drew. And again, just as a friendly reminder, after we give Drew an opportunity to respond to this question, we are going to shift our format a little bit. The questions will be posed, and then it will be an open response. Not everyone has to respond, but if you feel moved and you have something to share that's new or different, a perspective that hasn't been shared, then you'll have that opportunity. But we did want to finish out this second question, giving each person an opportunity to respond. So Drew, I'll repeat the question just in case. How does the Rebels mascot help Freeman High School?
Well, I'm not going to go over what has been said before. I agree with just about everything. We certainly have made the effort, I say we, the Freeman family has made the effort to eliminate the symbols, the logo, everything that, again, belongs in the past and is in the past, certainly not in the future of Douglas Freeman. I like the idea, quite frankly, of no mascot. If you go to our football games last year, there was no less enthusiasm for not having a mascot or any of those things. So I think the idea of keeping, now, if Rebels is the mascot versus the name, I guess we're parsing things. But I'm talking about an image, an icon, Dixie as a song, all those things that were very much a part of Douglas Freeman in the beginning. They're not a part of Douglas Freeman in 2020. They have been retired to the past, and Freeman is moving along. We are just as academically successful as we've ever been, with or without those images. So I like the idea of no icon, if that's what we're looking at, rather than a nickname. And it allows people to enjoy it in their own fashion, in their own mind.
Thank you. So we're getting some questions from viewers as well, and I want to make sure to incorporate them into some of our conversation. And so folks are asking questions that sort of get at what is there to gain by changing the Rebels mascot, and what might be lost, what feelings might be lost. Maybe we can hear from 2 or 3 folks. Either what do you think is an opportunity that comes from changing the mascot, and what, if anything, might be lost as a result? Anyone want to take that? Kennedy, it looks like you unmuted.
Yeah, I can take something that will be gained by that. I think it is good for a community to model to its younger generation that it is important to have these type of conversations and make these type of accommodations for people who are in marginalized groups who have not been taken care of, have not been looked out for. And if we start having those conversations now and showing our students now, hey, there was an issue with this, and so we changed it to make it better for other people and for us all to feel good. I feel like that's something that by starting that early on, they'll take that with them in college. They'll take that with them later on. They'll teach that to their children, and they will remember that they learned that at Freeman.
Thank you. So something to be gained potentially. Jamie, you want to jump in? It looks like you unmuted.
Yeah. I want to come back to a bit of this notion of inclusivity that we've been sort of harking at. I've done a ton of analyses around inclusivity measures in the past, and one thing that is important to think about when measuring inclusivity is that one, you can take, like, I'm going to use numbers because I'm big on numbers. So you can look at averages across for a particular question that's being asked, right? So do I have adverse feelings towards the name Rebel as a moniker for our school? And we can look at that, and we may find majority of folks are okay with it, right? Like, that might be the case. It might be a coin flip, 50-50, in which case maybe there's no action to be taken. I think that the real challenge is looking at the second measurement in terms of disparities. So when we look at a question like that, there's certain things that you should control for and ensure we see no differences in. And a simple cut of data would be to look at it by race, ethnicity, gender. When we look at that particular question by race, my strong hypothesis is that we would see a very large disparity in terms of our marginalized groups that doesn't come across when we look at the question when we're only looking at averages, right? So our intent to be inclusive, I think that the spirit is there, and that's right. For us to do that, we need to address this disparity amongst our marginalized groups. Elephant in the room, Black folks don't like the association with the Confederacy that we see here. And I truly don't think that there's a level of disassociation that we can create with our best intent to do that with this current name. I think that Fred, you even alluded at synonyms for it, freedom fighter, right? I think that that's something that could be considered revolutionaries, right? Like, there are other words associated to the same spirit that you're talking about when you're saying we're all rebels. We can all be revolutionaries, right? We don't have to hold ourselves to a particular word that disparages marginalized groups in doing so.
Thank you. So we've heard some perspectives on what might be gained or the opportunities there in terms of inclusion. What about some other thoughts on what could be gained or what could be lost? Harry, you want to jump in, and then Fred?
Sure. I agree totally with Jamie and Kennedy about what could be gained. I think that after 70 years almost, certainly if the name were changed, then it's going to lose its identity that has been built up over those years, and whether for good or bad kind of thing. So as the narrative has been changed over the last few years, and I think that that's been great, and it's been relatively successful, of course. But I think that for those as Fred said, 30,000 alumni, and even the current student population, trying to create a new identity is going to take some time.
Thank you. And Fred, you had a hand up. You want to jump in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I'll take the dissenting view in just a couple words of caution, I guess. And I'm thinking about the 30,000 plus alumni. Probably my best guess expertise is that there's 10 to 15,000 Freeman alumni probably still within a 90-minute radius of Richmond. So we're talking a fair amount of groups. So let's, when we talk about identity, let's also use the word community as opposed, inclusive with family and the rebel community, the rebel family. There's something that we've all learned in school, the butterfly effect. Move a letter of a word, and then years later, something's completely different. So let's. I guess my dissent is a word of caution with the potential harm to the community that is now 66 years old. And although we have 30 to 40,000 alumni, faculty, coaches, you have parents and brothers and sisters. You could easily create a number, Jamie, statistically with numbers of a influence of 100,000 people, including the nuclear family that attended Rebels. I will tell you that there are multi-generational families at Freeman, and you all have experienced this, that are attracted to the consistency of excellence. And so when one talks about taking the last vestige, if you will, after songs and mascots and symbols, which are fine, we're left with an archetype linked to Rebels, the term, that again has very positive connotations and characteristics in this local community. So I'll close with the idea that to disrupt a positive characteristic that is well within the community for decades, that you could actually create a butterfly effect of abandonment, betrayal, disassociation, that I think would be irreparable. Thank you.
Well, I can remember saying during my days at Freeman that Freeman isn't good for any of us unless it's good for all of us. And I think the emphasis needs to be on the future. I worked closely with Fred in establishing the Alumni Association. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the work he did to get it started. He was the key driver. And it is unique, and it's wonderful. It's powerful. But I think a school needs to think about the incoming freshman class and all of those in the future primarily. That should be our primary concern. And about a third of the students would be uncomfortable going forward with the word rebel being associated, being across their chest on athletic uniforms. They just would. And even if it doesn't make us uncomfortable, those of us for whom have more positive associations with it, I think we need to understand that. And so once again, if it isn't good for all of us, it isn't good for any of us, because we can find something to put across our chests that everyone wearing the uniform can be proud of in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for all of the responses to the question. So I'm going to throw out and pose a new question. How does it feel this evening to hear perspectives about the school or about the Rebels mascot that are different from your own?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Nope. Coach Bright, are you going to jump in?
Well, I think one of the things that makes Douglas Freeman the strong school that it's been is the acceptance of diversity. I think our leadership center, our sports teams, I think that I felt anyway that there was no one that who was silenced in terms of what they felt or what they wanted to say. So I've had no problem hearing the discussions. I don't think any of the feelings are surprising, again, given the time period. So it's something that happens at Douglas Freeman on a regular basis, I think. We sit down and we discuss things, listen to opposite points of view, don't always come to a conclusion on things, but I think it's a place where people are encouraged to give their opinion of things.
Thank you. I think Jamie was going to share.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that I hope that this is modeling sort of civil discourse, being able to hear differing opinions without getting riled up kind of thing. I hope that we're displaying that, and that's certainly at least my feeling in having this conversation. I think it's important for folks to understand that everybody's passionate about the future of Douglas South Hall Freeman and ensuring that we are providing an inclusive environment for our students. And I think that it's healthy debate, although we're not technically debating, healthy discussion to have. So I very much appreciated the differing views that we're sharing here. I will say, I don't think that it's the views are surprising. I think that these views are the ones, as Principal Marshall alluded to, the voices here represent swaths of folks who responded to the poll. So I don't think that there are any major surprises in terms of the things that I've heard.
I'll
Fred,
just
it looks like
briefly
you're jumping in.
comment. I've enjoyed this. I really have. I think it's well moderated. And again, didn't anticipate, no surprises to me. I just want to, retain the long-term perspective into the future, being consistent with a message of excellence. And if I could close one point on my previous thing of the butterfly effect, there's several ways to acknowledge discomfort and anxiety over a name. Removing the name may be one. Alternatives for a name change may be more engagement from alumni into the mentor program, maybe a tutorial program, maybe an assistant coaching program, those kind of things. One risk, and we have to be very careful, and it goes back to the negative butterfly effect, is if we're removing the rebel name because of a racist connotation to some people, and I don't deny that it may exist, and I think it comes more from outside than inside, but you risk candidly defaming or smearing 30,000 people of being racists. And so why did they change the name unless they were racist? And so it's a very slippery slope there. And so I would counsel that we should take all effort and means to arrive at a solution to keep the name. And that's what I've gotten from this discussion tonight.
Thank you. We also have some questions from the folks who are viewing, and we appreciate folks sending things in. If you haven't done so, freemanmascot.info is a place to be able to submit your questions. There's some questions about contextualizing the mascot in terms of what it has been to what it is now. So some folks are saying, doesn't that change? So taking out the actual mascot, taking out the logo, does that then imply or demonstrate that there's a problem with it? And others who are asking about the history of the school in general, and so the creation of the school, things like that. Does that shape or inform how you view this issue today? I wonder if anyone can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, Harry?
Yeah, Jonathan, let me, from my perspective, I think that rebel could be, the narrative could be changed in a couple different ways. Fred had kind of alluded to one. I would have done things differently, perhaps, when Rebel Man was taken out of as a personification. And I think that what had happened, I know that it's tough because you're trying to kind of split the middle, if you will. And I think that perhaps the school would have been better off, instead of just getting rid of one, is to create something else at that time, whatever that might be. I was doing some reading this afternoon, and I know Kennedy, maybe even you, I guess you were there at school when apparently there was a push for a lion to become the new mascot. And of course that didn't go anywhere. And unfortunately there was a reactive push back to bring the Rebel Man back as the mascot. But I think that Rebel, if it's recontextualized in a way, as we have discussed, with a broader definition, broader context, there's some, somebody had said something about even the Revolutionary War. I think, the colonists, they were rebels. And I like what Jamie said about Star Wars. I mean, that's just got some really cool thoughts behind it. Kind of, you just see the lasers going off and everything else. But Rebel by itself would be very tough, I think. I think going back to maybe what Fred was saying, of coming up with something else. I'm not sure if naming it a rebel would work, but you're going to qualify the word somehow, make it an adjective. And so that it becomes the rebel something. And then that way you can create a mascot from that and still retain the name. And of course, put out a total narrative about what that means. I mean, it could be any number of things, but it's qualifying Rebel with something else.
Other thoughts on that? Yeah, Kennedy.
I can echo what I said in a few, I guess it's been a few minutes now, in that for me personally, I don't think that there's a level of recontextualization that is sufficient. I personally feel as though the identity of a student does not lie in the mascot nickname or whatever of any school. In elementary school, I was a tiger. In middle school, I was a falcon. And apparently in high school, I was a rebel. And I guess at Spelman, I'm like a jaguar, although we don't say that. And so for me, that had nothing to do with the experience that I had. And when it comes to the conversation of making sure that we are almost putting what my understanding is, I'll say that we are putting the feelings, emotions, and comfortability of students, current students and future students on the back burner to protect the emotions and camaraderie and pride of the 30,000 alumni, which I am now apparently a part of. I don't think that the feelings of the alumni outweighs the future of the school and all of the alumni that are to come, all of the lessons that there are to learn. And I think that it says a lot to be ahead in this conversation rather than being retroactive later. I think that, like Dr. Pruden said, talking about the Redskins, that was just this week. Why not do it now while we're in this wave of change, rather than being consistently looked back and saying, well, Freeman had a chance in 2000, Freeman had a chance in 2015, Freeman had a chance in 2020. I say just go ahead and do it, because I can assure you that the conversation won't end. So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I might also just add that over the years, we've tried to dilute or reduce the association with the Confederacy, right? We've gotten rid of Dixie, we've gotten rid of the Rebel Man, but diluting is not eliminating, right? And I think that it's tough for folks to make the disassociation when we haven't completely eliminated that feeling in the Rebel word itself. And just like one thing, I promise I will not think that if we change it, that the 30,000 alum are racist. I don't want that to come across at all. And maybe the last acknowledgement is that cultural change is tough. It is very, very difficult, right? I think that letting go of something, regardless of what it is a challenging endeavor. And I think that in times of change, it is something that happens. Maybe I can quickly reflect on like an interesting thing that happened to me at Freeman. So my freshman year, I was able to get the Most Improved Player Award for basketball. I don't know if Most Improved is necessarily a great thing, but I had improved the most. And what came along with that was a dedication for the award that gave some background about the award itself and the person it was in honor of. And this person had traumatically passed away. And I think the James River had drowned, and their family had taken it upon themselves to make sure that their memory lived on through this award. But as part of that, the reason for it was in protesting busing that was occurring at the time. And for those of you who don't know, that's when we were going through desegregation, they would bus the colored students into the school. So it was tough for me to tie those two things together. And I think that we've come an incredibly far way, but the culture change then, I know that that's an extreme. Desegregation is a large thing, but there are going to be folks who are resistant to change, and rightfully so, right? That's the way it's been for so long. But I do think that we have evolved, and over time, change is a healthy thing for society. And in this case, I think it'll be a healthy thing for the alumni as well.
Jamie, I do want to name also that talking about the evolution of language. So in talking about desegregation, the language that you use, the direct quote colored, would not be a word that folks would be using today. So I want to make sure for our viewers to understand in the same way that certain words or concepts may be used at one time and not presently. Drew, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity if there's anything that you're hearing that you want to add to or respond to.
No, I am probably in concert with most things on both sides, quite frankly. When I started at Freeman, we didn't have any air conditioning, and we obviously got air conditioning, and that was a great improvement. So certainly we need to continue to advance. We need to continue to improve. And again, as Jamie was saying, no matter what happens, there are going to be people on both sides. We just have to sit down, look at the whole thing, and decide what seems to be best for Douglas Freeman High School now and in the future. Again, I think that the high school has done a great deal to improve the image away from the obvious Civil War context. And again, I like the idea of, quite frankly, no mascot in terms of an icon, so that everybody can have whatever they want to come out of Rebels. And again, intensity and pride is one we've used in Freeman family. We have a number of sayings that we've used to describe to the public exactly what we're all about. We certainly, from the inside, we know exactly where we are. And I think those statements, intensity and pride in Freeman family, go a long way in trying to describe to the outside world what Douglas Freeman is actually about.
Thank you. Charm, you want to jump in with the next question?
I do. So as we start thinking about and talking about community, I want to pose the question, do you think changing the mascot would change the community or the connectedness of the school?
Well, I will say certainly, again, there are going to be people on both sides. There are people that are going to be, if there is a change, depending on what the change is, I guess, there'll be people that are very pleased with the change, and there will be people who will be not pleased with the change. And I think when you make changes like this, if you do, that's just, you understand that's a price that's going to be paid. And you just have to decide where the greater good is in those sorts of things. You're not going to please everybody. If you stay exactly where you are, you're not going to make everybody happy. So I think you really have to, people with good intentions, with good hearts, have to sit down and look at the entire situation of Douglas South Hall Freeman High School, and they have to make that decision. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to have unhappy people no matter where you go on your decision. As soon as you announce something like this, that you're looking at this, people are going to pick sides. People are going to have their feelings on this, and depending upon the eventual solution to it, that's where they're going to be.
Thank you. Fred, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Well, we are in the heat of the moment. There's no question. The change is occurring in this country at a rapid pace. That does not mean all change needs to happen during this period. Thoughtful, reasoned change is one thing. Following a activated herd, stampeding may lead us to somewhere we don't want to go or enjoy in the future. So the grass may not be greener in some respects. I don't think there is a resistance to change. To address a couple of my colleagues, I think the community realizes that, and the data is there, that we have been able to change under the name rebels using the expanded definition, the liberal definition, the inclusive definition. And our track record is clear, academically and athletically. There's no deleterious effect of the name rebel on anything that we really have done. Now, granted, there's some feelings at stake, but it doesn't seem that it's affected performance versus division or state academic metrics, if we've all looked at those. Douglas Freeman is still a statewide leader and has been for decades. So if we are asked to explain why we want to change, and we are consistently coming back to emotion in the heat of the moment, I would ask, why now? Why not 24 months when the smoke is cleared and clearer minds can prevail? Would be one aspect. While we work on alternatives, maybe it's the bulldog named Rebel, maybe it's the racehorse named Rebel, to address the link with icons and imagery. And so I think the butterfly effect, and I'll share with you, I got a call from a prominent alumni. I won't name names, but quote unquote, if they change the name, I won't set foot on the campus again, and they'll never get another dollar from me. And so that's an extreme. But if we're going to use extreme feelings and methods, we have to look at the whole, bell curve, if you will, of outcomes. And this community has supported this school for decades among many changes and evolutions. They will continue to support the school with changes and evolutions under the name of Rebel. But I feel confident we can arrive at alternatives. And so that's my comment on that. Thank you.
So I noticed several people unmuting. I thought I saw Ed unmute. I also thought I saw Kennedy unmute. So want to give folks that opportunity if that is what I'm reading.
Dr. Pruden, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Kennedy. Well, we all live in the context of our community, and I still read the paper. Maybe some of you do too. And I read in the paper fairly consistently that among all the changes that are happening in our state and city and nation, two local schools pop up frequently, and it's Lee Davis High School and Douglas Freeman Rebels. And it's just a context I don't think we can escape, really. I have appreciated over the years the attempts by the student body to expand the word rebel to include those that King George thought were rebels during the Revolutionary War. And I just think that though right now we're living at a time in history, a time of change, I think the majority community is beginning to have a conversation that they really haven't had. Things are being discussed that you didn't used to hear about: white privilege and things like that that have been uncomfortable and avoided. They're now being talked about by people who didn't want to have that conversation. And I just hope that Freeman won't be the last school to come into the 21st century. I just hope that Hanover County, which is a lovely but very conservative community, I just hope they don't beat us to the punch and do something about Lee Davis and we're still over here talking about the word rebel, because the context is unmistakable at this point in time.
Before I was about to go, I was just going to respond to first the saying that the term rebel hasn't necessarily negatively impacted the effect of the school and the benefits that we've had and the excellence, the academic excellence, the sports excellence. How great would it be to have a school where we can exceed in all of that and also make sure that all of our students are comfortable? I don't think that changing it would make us have negative impacts in our testing or our academics or our sports either. So I think that it's really just extending that to make sure that while we're just as academically excellent, we're also making sure that our students in all groups, in all shape, sizes, whatever, are just as comfortable as the majority group. And I think that continuously alluding to the fact that the community, our Freeman community, for those who may be listening who aren't as familiar, the Freeman community is very, very specific. Yes, that is a very diverse group, but when you hear someone say the Freeman community, the generational students and all of those things, that's a specific group of people. And nothing is wrong with that at all, but how great would it be to extend that community? I think that to answer your initial question, Ms. Bullard, which was, how does changing the name change the community, change the connectivity of the community? I think it encourages greater connectivity across the bridge rather than just with the majority group. I think that the connectivity in a majority population of the school will be the same regardless of the name. It will still be generations of families who have been Freeman students. But I think it would be great to have those connections made with students who haven't felt like they belonged or haven't felt necessarily that they were proud of their school and what that represented. And I think that would be a huge change in the climate and the environment of the school if we had that difference.
Thank you, Kennedy. We're coming up towards the end of our time together this evening. I want to acknowledge a few of the questions that were asked that we don't have time for, that aren't necessarily connected to asking you all questions, but that are important to folks. Several people have asked who ultimately makes the decision. It's the school administration that will make the decision about the mascot. There are some folks have asked about the name itself. So be a school named after Douglas Freeman. That is a conversation that the school board would ultimately have decision-making authority around. And that's not what we've been asked to at least focus on or discuss tonight. Some folks have asked about any costs associated with the change. And I think that can be something that school administrators perhaps put onto the Freeman Mascot website and the frequently asked questions. And then there have also been some questions about the current climate today at the school in terms of student interaction, as well as why there aren't students who have been invited to participate in the panel. And as Mr. Marshall noted at the beginning, out of a desire to protect current students from the possibility of being attacked or targeted in any way, the thought was to engage alumni and other close friends of the school in this conversation. But we do have current students who will be providing support and guidance to the administration as they go through the deliberation process. So I wanted to acknowledge those questions. As we wrap up, I'll give each person a chance to respond, maybe sharing one hope that you have for Freeman High School going forward. It's clear that every person who's on this panel cares deeply about this school. What is one hope that you have for Freeman as this school goes forward? And Coach Bright, we'll start with you.
Well, my hope is that this resolves itself, that Douglas Freeman continues on the trajectory that it's been for 66 years, that our alumni, our faculty, and our staff continue to be very proud. And when you hear the name of Douglas South Hall Freeman, you stand up just a little bit taller and you acknowledge your small part in making Douglas Freeman what it has been over these last 66 years, the first 66 years.
Thank you. Kennedy, you want to go next? One hope you have for Freeman High School.
Sure. I, of course, hope that there's a resolution, like Coach Bright said, for this conversation. And I also hope that we continue to have these conversations, because this is far from the last one. There's always room to grow, like I said, to ensure that we are creating a community in which everyone feels like they belong, they are welcomed, and they are comfortable to do the best that they can do. Because at the end of the day, that's what high school is about, is making sure that you're comfortable, making sure that you are doing what's necessary to push you into that next stage of life. And if you're not comfortable there, there's no way that you're necessarily going to do that to the best of your ability.
Thank you, Kennedy. Harry, what do you think? One hope you have for Freeman High School?
Well, my hope is that Freeman continues to keep beating deep run on the gridiron. That's in all seriousness, my hope is, and I think that it's very ingrained, is that Freeman continues just to have that family atmosphere. And I think that we've shown that this evening, to be able to have these tough conversations. And that's what it really comes down to be able to do. As a family, not everybody's always going to agree. I was on a similar Zoom last night, and somebody equated it to a family at Thanksgiving dinner, and you get all kinds. Don't bring up politics. Don't bring up whatever it might be. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. And I think that as we continue to have these conversations, as Kennedy said, and continue to have that family atmosphere, I think that regardless of the outcome, that Freeman will be successful.
Thank you. Jamie, one hope you have for Freeman High School?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of echoing what others have said. I think to Kennedy's point around increasing inclusion across the school, making sure that, to Dr. Pruden's point, if it doesn't work for some of us, it doesn't work for all of us. I'm sure I butchered that saying. And also that we've done a good job at modeling how to have tough conversations, and that folks continue to have tough conversations. I think that people are more accepting of having these conversations nowadays, and I hope that folks continue to do so. I think that those are a few things, and that we continue to be deep run.
Thank you. Some points of agreement there. Fred, hope you have for Freeman High School going forward.
Well, I'm so excited to be a part of the group and talk about Freeman in the community. It's just it's so deep. And when we talk about evolution, it's real. And so my hope would be that we can find or allow the freedom to evolve naturally within a consistency. And I'll close with this comment. Consistency is attractive to people over time, because it means you stand for values even though you evolve. And again, I'll go back and close with this. The standard of excellence that our administrators and teachers and coaches and fellow students have built over 66 years is under the name of Rebel. And that is a broad, inclusive, open definition of the term, and it's open to all. It's not exclusive to any. And the standard of excellence does not exclude anyone. Everybody is welcome to pursue the standard of excellence. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And Ed, will ask you to wrap up one hope you have, and then Mr. Marshall will come back on and offer some closing comments.
All schools have a culture that's built over time. The way I describe it is something's in the bricks. And what I know is in the bricks at Douglas Freeman High School is intensity and pride. And I also know, and firmly believe that whatever decision is made about this matter, that Freeman will always be best described by Freeman family.
Thank you. Charm and I are so grateful to each of you for your commitment, for your candor, for the care that you have shown for these issues and for one another. And Mr. Marshall will give you the last word.
Well, I just want to say thank you to first and foremost our expert moderators of this conversation and for lending your expertise, Charm and Jonathan. You all are skilled and we really appreciate your time and working with us here. I want to say thank you to the panel for the care and time you took into this conversation. It is a courageous thing to do, to stand in front of our community and share your beliefs and feelings. And I respect you for doing that and appreciate you doing that. And this conversation exceeded even my expectations, which were high, knowing each of you and your abilities to communicate how you're feeling. This conversation is so important. I do think that school symbols matter. I know that school culture matters, to Dr. Pruden's point, and community matters, which is why we're taking such care in making this decision through events like this, by getting feedback from the community and taking our time with the committee who will advise my decision. The next steps for those that are watching, we will be announcing kind of the committee that's been formed separate from this panel, the committee that's been selected to help my team and myself make this decision. I'll be announcing that, and we'll put that on the freemanmascot.info website and probably link to some social media if I know some questions are coming regarding that. So that'll come actually tomorrow. And then we hope to share our decision after thoughtful deliberation early to mid-August, so that we will have some resolution on what we propose the next steps are at that time. I want to close with answering, I'm not on the panel, but answering Jonathan and Charm's question regarding a hope I have for Freeman, and that is that we remain a Freeman family throughout tough conversations that we're having, and that we look back at some point in the next 65 years at this moment as one that brought us closer together as a Freeman family, where we were able to model this type of conversation and grow even more united as a community, because a strong, united community, a family, is a powerful tool, powerful vehicle for building learners and leaders, which is exactly what we aim to do in our building. Thank you so much to everybody that's involved, and everybody have a pleasant evening.